Welcome to Psychic Insights, where pop culture meets higher consciousness and the tea is always a little bit mystical. I'm Robin Richardson, your psychic girlfriend, and around here we don't just watch the drama unfold, we read the energy behind it, whether it's celebrity scandals, reality TV, chaos, or true crime with a twist. I'm tuning in to bring you the intuitive scoop the headlines miss. So buckle up, because your aura's about to get entertained. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Robin Richardson, your psychic girlfriend, and it's another installment of the Shirilla saga. And after the last few weeks, I watched the documentary Crash, and then I've been listening to Steve Shirilla's interviews with Cuomo and some other places, and then now we have the interview with Natalie Shirilla. And I also listened to a 911 call that Steve made when Mackenzie was a young teenager, only a few years before the crash. And what struck me wasn't one single statement, it's a pattern. And you know us, if you're here, you know we look at the patterns, we read the cards, we read the energy behind all of this, right? And so if you are new here, welcome. And if you are returning, thank you for supporting my channel. I appreciate it so much. And if you could do me a solid and like and subscribe, that would be helpful. And if you choose to make a comment, which I hope you do, make sure it's kind and thoughtful. I try to read them all. All right. So we've got this call, this 911 call, and Steve says to the dispatcher, I don't know what to do. My daughter's combative. She's screaming. She's threatening to harm herself. And years later, we have Natalie describing a loving, misunderstood young woman. She talks about Mackenzie's compassion, her creativity, her love for Dominic, survivor's guilt, and says the public doesn't know the real Mackenzie. And she also minimizes the significance of prison disciplinary issues, explaining that some involved items like an extra blanket or vitamins, and declines to elaborate on more personal allegations. Both interviews are deeply emotional, and obviously the parents love their daughter. Why wouldn't they? But they also left me asking one question: at what point does love stop helping us see clearly and start making it harder to recognize patterns? And today obviously is not about deciding anybody's guilt or innocence. What we know is she's been convicted of murder, right? She's in jail. But we're really looking at about something that every parent, every spouse, every friend, every one of us has experienced, the stories we tell ourselves to survive. And also seeing versions of people, like their daughter, or refusing to see that version of who she is or was outside of their home. And I find that really sad, that there is a really difficult reconciliation between the version of Mackenzie that she is and the version of Mackenzie they wish that she was, and the version of Mackenzie that they knew as this loving, compassionate, kind person. And can they all exist at the same time? Yes, they can. These versions can exist. And as a parent, especially in these kind of situations, it's what we're seeing here is a lack of reconciliation with that version of Mackenzie who's in jail. All right, so, watching Natalie, obviously, I never doubted this. She loves her daughter deeply, and she isn't speaking like an attorney. She's speaking more like a mom, and she wants the world to remember her daughter as the artist, the friend, the young woman who laughed, the daughter she tucked into bed, the girl she knew before everything changed. Of course she wants the world to see that girl. I don't blame her for that. But, Because, like, let's face it, if your daughter or your child became the most hated person in America tomorrow, would you stop seeing that child that you raised, or would you fight to remind the world there was more to them? And I think most parents know the answer. But then comes the pattern. And here's what I kept noticing. Every difficult behavior had an explanation. School conflicts had context. The prison disciplinary reports had context. Everything became an individual event. Every parent does this. Every one of us has probably said, well, they're just tired or they're stressed. That's not who they really are. And sometimes that's absolutely true. And sometimes something else is happening. Sometimes we're looking at individual events when we should be asking whether they're connected. Not because we're trying to judge someone, but because patterns often tell us more than isolated moments. And then listening to the 911 call, Steve's 911 call, that really hit me differently because Steve wasn't trying to persuade the public. He wasn't giving an interview. He was asking for help. And according to the transcript, he told the dispatcher Mackenzie was out of control, combative, threatening to harm herself, and that he didn't know what to do. I don't hear a villain in that call. I feel like I hear a father who feels overwhelmed, and I hear someone who's run out of answers, and that to me is heartbreaking. So why does the story sound so different today? And that's where the psychology fascinates me, because trauma just doesn't change us. It changes our memories, not necessarily the facts, but the meaning we assign to those facts. A parent who once thought my daughter's in crisis may later think she was just acting like a teenager. Not because they're trying to deceive anyone, but because their heart is trying to create a story so they can survive. So if we look at it like that, it makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, you know me, I love my Lenormand cards. I love this version of tarot, if you will. And I asked 5 different questions, not to decide a legal case, because that's not what I do, but to understand the emotional patterns. So the first question I asked is, what truth is Natalie trying to communicate that people are missing? And we got loud and clear. We got cross, we got clouds, we got stork, and we got mice. Natalie wants the world to understand that one tragic day does not erase an entire life. The cross tells me she carries this burden every single day. And probably privately, she blames herself. The clouds tell me that she feels people aren't seeing the full picture. And the stork shows she longs for a shift in how Mackenzie is perceived. And mice tells me this has quietly worn away at her for years. All right. Then we have, why has Steve's perspective changed over time? And we have house, we have birds, we have sun, and we have ship. And these cards don't say deception per se. They speak of a journey, years of conversations, research, reflection, searching for meaning other than the meaning that it is, right? The sun tells me that he believes the story he's telling, whether others agree with him or not. So that's okay, right? That's how he's seeing it. I mean, maybe it's not okay, but that's how it is, right? But the cards suggest that this is the understanding he has arrived at after years living with unimaginable loss. And I found myself thinking about something bigger than this case. Can explanations become a substitute for recognizing patterns? Because there's a difference between saying, I understand why this happened, and saying, this keeps happening. That's true in parenting, and it's true in relationships. It's true in families. It's true in our own lives, because sometimes we become so skilled at explaining each individual event that we never step back and ask whether they're connected. Okay, so the next question I asked was, what emotional burden is Mackenzie carrying today? And I got a very interesting spread. We got heart and key and dog and scythe. And I don't see someone whose greatest wound is simply incarceration. I see someone whose deepest wound centers on love, loyalty, and irreversible loss. The cards suggest that the relationships severed in an instant remain at the center of her emotional world. So even when we're seeing her break the rules and do all those things, at the heart of her at this point is that deepest wound. So whether she's sharing that or not, I don't know. All right. So the next question was, what healing hasn't happened within this family? This is interesting. I got child, woman, path, and garden. And this feels like two parallel realities. There's a daughter the family remembers, and there's the daughter the public believes it knows. And the family seems to be standing at a crossroads, trying to reconcile those two realities. That healing does not appear complete. How can it be? What we can ask those questions is, how do the parents come to that integration that they didn't really know their daughter? I mean, how can you really know anyone? And to accept that these are the consequences of her actions, instead of blaming or focusing on a version of her that they want to see rather than the version they have to see. All right, so of course I've got to ask the deeper question of, what is the deeper spiritual lesson here? Interesting. We got moon, mountain, whip, and stars. And the moon speaks of emotion and perception, which is what we've been talking about this whole episode. And the mountain is the obstacle that refuses to move. The public's perception of Mackenzie. Maybe their own. Okay? Maybe their own. And then we have whip. And that reminds us that we revisit the same questions over and over again. And stars invite us to look higher. And maybe this isn't a case. Maybe this case isn't really asking us to choose sides, but maybe it's asking us to examine ourselves. Where do we explain away patterns in our own lives? That's just who I am type of thing, right? Where does protection become blindness? And where can accountability and compassion exist together? And those are uncomfortable questions. But they're also the questions that help us grow. So I hope that Steve and Natalie can ask those questions of themselves and come to some understanding, whether it's none of our business, right? It's none of our business. But as long as they keep going on these interviews, then they make it our business, right? So I really believe this family, I don't believe this family stopped loving their daughter. Of course not. I believe they're trying to preserve the whole person they knew before this one devastating day changed everything. And at the same time, this episode challenged me to think about something we all do. Sometimes we focus so much on the explanation behind each individual event that we never pause to ask whether those events form a larger pattern. And this isn't a judgment of the Shirilla family. It's a human tendency. And maybe that's why this story resonates with so many people, because somewhere in it, we can all recognize ourselves, whether as parents or children or partners or simply people trying to make sense of trauma and pain. And as always, these readings are offered as intuitive and reflective spiritual reflections, and they are not conclusions, legal or otherwise, and they're not meant to replace evidence of the court or the process. And these are my opinions only for entertainment only. And my hope is that these conversations can really encourage us to think more deeply, not only about this case, but our own lives. We all love this true crime stuff, right? There's a reason. So have you ever looked back and realized you were explaining away individual events instead of seeing a larger pattern? I know I have. And do you think that unconditional love can sometimes create blind spots? Absolutely, of course. Or do you believe that preserving someone's humanity is just as important as holding them accountable? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. And until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember that sometimes the greatest spiritual lessons come from asking the hardest questions. I'm Robin Richardson. Thank you for being here, liking, subscribing, and comment only if you're going to be kind. And I will see you in the next one.